Hey guys, this is a hand that I was looking at yesterday, and I ran through all the analysis, but I figured I would go through it again, just to hopefully organize things a little more clearly for myself. And then of course, if someone's interested in learning from it, then that's all the better. So I guess I'll entitle this video Manipulating Calling Ranges by Bet Size. And we'll go That'll be self-explanatory by the end of the video. But for now, I guess what I'll do is I'll run through the hand, and then I'll provide my thought process and analysis from my in-game frame of mind or frame of thinking. And we can expand upon that as the video progresses. And I'm using this software, it's called Flopzilla. It's really helpful to analyze complex spots. So again, if you're interested in that, you should probably go ahead and buy it from, I think, no, who sells it? Card Runners, I think. It was only $20 or something. Um, yeah, it's a really useful tool. And I guess without further ado, I'll just kind of jump in. So I raise Ace King of Hearts under the gun, and this is our adversary here, opponent or villain, as everyone likes to call it in the poker world. So we got a pretty good flop for our hand. And I guess first of all we should talk about this guy. So I only have 35 hands on him, and he's playing 26-9. And because the sample size is so small, we can't really draw any sort of estimations on his playing tendencies or any of his post flop frequencies or whatever. So if you want to take the correct theoretical response, we'll just play optimal versus him. And we do that because theory is a good baseline and a good baseline for our decision making process. And this is simply because theory protects us from exploitation. So once you can introduce new variables, and for instance, I just said we don't know anything about this player, but let's say we understand, well, let's say we have some more information at our disposal versus him. For instance, he calls wider than optimal, so we can start including thinner value bets for clearer value bets. Basically, we'd be expanding our value betting range versus him because he's protecting way more widely and we're exploiting him for that. So our value is forcing production at a higher frequency than you're allowed to in theory. And that's how we would be exploiting him and printing more monies versus that player type. So here we don't know anything about this player. We're going to default into giving him a first of all an optimal range, and then we're gonna play according to that. And again, that's a simple measure to safeguard ourselves from exploitation ourselves. And I actually made an adjustment on his range, but we'll talk about that later on. So again, this is a very good flop for us. Um, if you want to look at how ranges compare here, these are the ranges I'm using. So under the gun, I'm raising this range right here. I plugged in the flop here. Ignore the deck cards for now, I guess. You can see how our opening range is pretty top heavy, meaning we're going to have a ton of King X, we're going to have a ton of really strong draw, we're going to have a ton of really good semi-bluff quality hands, like gutters and stuff. We have every set covered, and there's a ton of draw out there. So it's pretty much a flop that drills us, and we definitely are favored in this formation. Now let's take a look at an optimal button call versus under the gun. You can see it's way more narrow compared to ours, and it's more balanced. So because it's more balanced, he's pretty much gonna have less hands which will threaten our betting range. And with a hand like Ace King, we're clearly trying to bet over multiple streets to force our production per unit of value to the highest possible amount. Okay, so as played, a very easy bet. Once he calls, this is my thinking in game, and it's relevant now too. So once he calls, he's essentially splitting his range, and I feel like he's gonna be way more weighted towards draw, and a hand like 10x, king x, queens through jacks, and this is because I think most players can intuit that a set here just makes it's so much more functional as a raise here for multiple reasons. I listed them down here. Um, First of all, we talked about how this flop completely draws our range, so we're super protected. And a hand like sevens and tens, it wants to capitalize versus our range, uh, versus the dominated part of our range, like king x, aces, draw. We'll talk about draw in a second. So it wants to shovel as much money as it can right now to capitalize versus those type of holdings. Um, so playing it passively doesn't make sense off the bat, and I think most players at NL 100 will understand that. Of course, you get the rare player who decides to play it passively, and we account for that. So what I wound up doing was giving him only 25% of his tens and sevens on the flop, and I think that's pretty reasonable. And yeah, it also makes sense to because the flop is two tone. With a hand like a set, it wants it wants to push a draw past its EV threshold, and in layman's terms, it's pretty much saying it wants to price a draw out, and by calling here, a draw is never making a mistake. And if you raise here, I'm calling pretty much on my draw, but on the turn, there comes a point where we're probably going to get priced out if he plays it aggressively. This is on blank turns, obviously. And he bets over, definitely over 2/3. That's when we can start getting priced out. So, a set displays way more functionally versus a draw by raising because its incentive is to push a draw past its indifference threshold to the extent where the draw just gets completely shut out. And that's based on the dead pot dynamic relative to his bet sizing. And then we talked about, yeah, this is pretty much synonymous with the protected part here. It hits the under the gun range so often, so a set really wants to capitalize versus dominated hands, like ace king here. So, okay. The turn is actually really good because if he does call with a set on the flop, now he can only have one set of sevens, which would be quads, and its relative strength value is pretty much the same. So that's good for us. And this card doesn't really threaten the board integrity at all, so it's a very good spot for us to just keep on c-betting because he's pretty much capping his range at these cards right here, which is a draw, a 10x, a king x, and queens and jacks, and we dominate all of that right now. And for that reason, I really don't like my turn bet sizing because he's so capped. I should be betting big. Like I could easily bet pot as functional here. I could probably even overbet as a functional sizing. For some reason, I picked 12. I should have at least bet 14, which is 3/4. So I regret that decision, but he calls. On the river, the flush card peels, and The reason I set out to analyze his hand was because in game I really didn't find that card threatening at all, and I just wanted to check myself that I'm not recklessly, overconfidently betting um, on this type of card, which clearly is going to strengthen his range because now his draw has improved. A lot of his flushes have hit, and it'll still contain hands like Queens Jacks and King X. So I decided a functional bet would be half pot here, and I actually think it's really good. But like I said, I questioned myself after just being results oriented can be jammed. So I folded, obviously. But I thought it was a very good spot to analyze, and just to make sure that my decision was based on a sound understanding of the range distribution or how his range constructed over multiple streets. Basically, just a solid just a solid understanding of how his range functioned as uh, as a result of the bet sizing that I'm continuing with on over each street. So yeah, and then after doing this little analysis, I really like it. So all we're gonna do is okay. First of all, let's talk about his range. Like I said at the beginning of the video, it's correct to just give him the kind of baseline optimal range, which I already showed you guys. It's here, bottom verse onto the gun. And I decided that I would also include half the combos of King Queen offsuit and a quarter combos of King Jack offsuit, just because he's playing 26-9, and for the same reason we want to discount him for having a set on the flop. We're taking extra precautions, like we don't want to exclude those from his range when a lot of regulars will oftentimes call King Queen offsuit 100% there, and it's not in an optimal range. And I'm actually using it as a 3-bet randomizer there because it has such good removal effect. King Jack offsuit is also a randomizer that I'll use, but mostly against later position opens. So yeah, we're basically taking an extra precaution there and just including some amount of combos in his range. And again, I think that seems very reasonable. So what we're going to do here is we're going to plug in his range, and then we're going to make those quick adjustments, which we talked about so far. So we're going to give him 50% of his King Queen offsuit, and we're blocking that of Ace King just for reference. We're going to give him 25% of his King Jack and 25% of his tens and sevens. Okay. And then from there, what we're going to do is try to estimate how his range is going to constrict or narrow after the flop and after all up to the river. And so we can we can assign him a range on the river, and then we can make some pretty accurate estimations of how his range is composed and the domination effect that a hand like Ace King still has over the range as a whole. And by doing that, we can measure our EV, and we'll do that in a second. So after he calls on the flop, we're gonna give him all of his pair of kings. So these type of hands. I'm just gonna presume he only has one combo of King 10 suited. So I'm just going to say he always raises that. Whoops. There we go. Ace King offsuit folds. Ace King calls. He should have 4 combos of that because we blocked that. These suited hands, they're going to be all the club type hands. And actually, the first time I went over this, I made a mistake and I used the wrong combo total amount because I included all the suited hands which will fold like ace king of hearts here, or sorry, like ace queen of hearts here is gonna fold on the turn presumably. At least on the turn, it should be folding on the flop unless he's gonna bluff raising. So anyway, pair of tens. Stacking sixes and fives, he folds. 7-6, he folds. 8-7, he folds. 9-8 suited. 8s, 9s, he folds. 9-8 suited, that's a draw right there, so that's good. 10-9 suited, pair of tens, and he's gonna have the flush draw bet too. Jack-9 suited, he's gonna have the flush draw. Jack-10 suited, flush draw plus pair sometimes. Queen-10 suited, pair plus flush draw sometimes. Queen-Jack suited is a draw, and it's two draws. It could potentially be two draws. And then pair of kings, yeah, that seems just about right. And queens and jacks. Okay. So considering the turn card, let's plug it in real quick, doesn't threaten the integrity of the board, I'm really not gonna change the range that he's calling the flop with on the turn. Well, maybe I should start excluding hands like 10-9 suited and 9-8 suited, and yeah, that seems pretty reasonable. But because people have the propensity to call way above optimal on two-tone boards, I'm gonna leave those in his range, and I think that is pretty sound logic too. So in practice, I don't think he's gonna be folding at the correct frequency that he should in theory, simply because there is clear draw out there. Like there's so much draw, so that would give him incentive. Like ace 10, I think is a very easy call because that's going to be in your optimal range. But once you get down to like jack 10, I think that's a very easy fold in theory. But to my point, I think most people just stick around on that turn because they go, oh, draw out there. I gotta overly protect myself. Okay. So that range doesn't really change much on the turn, so we're gonna go ahead and hit the river. And I pretty much wrote down here, like this is a mistake I made before. Right here it says 54.5 combos in pre-flop range, but that's also including hands like ace jack of hearts and stuff, and we don't want those. So it's actually 50.5 combos total, and I wrote it here. And that's all his pairs and flush I just hit, and jacks, queens, and king x. I guess that's included in the pairs. So from here, we can estimate how. Okay, so we've got half pot, and we're giving him 3-1 here. When we give him 3-1, he needs to defend 66% of the time. He should have at least 25% equity in order to do it. Those are the two parameters for it. He must defend 66% of the time, so we don't exploit him by betting wider, or pretty much betting any two cards. And his hand needs to have 25% equity to neutralize as a bluff catcher. So I just ran this quick algebra here to demonstrate that for this sizing, we need him to fold 33% of the time with our bluffs, let's say. So our opponent, and then of course we're bluffing at that frequency to give our opponent incentive to call. I made another video on that earlier. So we need our opponent to fold 33% of the time, so an optimal opponent defends 66%. For the sake of this video, let's presume that the inferior or suboptimal player pretty much defends at close to that frequency. And that's definitely a common theme you'll find, where you'll find the correct frequencies in theory, and then you can run an analysis on a huge database, and they pretty much come out very, very close to where they should be in theory. So this is what his range. This is how it's composed because it didn't change much on the turn, and now it's a matter of looking at how many combos beat us and how many combos we lose to. So I'm not going to run through each little thing here, but I will go through the list here. So starting range. Oops. First of all, okay. So he's 50.5 combos by the river, which is all these. And because he needs to defend 66% of the time, he's got to defend 33 combos. So there's 50.5 combos that he gets the river of, and he has to defend 33 combos after he bet hot pot here. So I came up with a good felting range. So he'll have 9 combos of flush, and 0.75 combos of full house, it's 10s, 0.25 combos of quads. That's because we discounted for them. 8.5 combos that we beat, which is like pair of kings, which is less than ace king. He's gonna have 4 combos of ace king, which we split with, and he's gonna have full combos of queens, that's 6, and then he's gonna have 2/3 combos of jacks, that's 4. So that amounts to 33 combos, and that seems like a good felting range, good assigned felting range. So of that range, 10 combos dominate us, 18.5 combos we dominate, and 4 combos we split with, which is ace king. So 30% of the time we lose this $20 bet. 56% of the time we win the dead pot and a call, which is $61.50. 14% of the time we wash versus ace king. So you just run some quick algebra there. It's not even algebra. Just run some quick calculations there, and we'll find that on average we're going to win 28.5 big blinds when we give him 3-1, and when his range composition looks like so, which I think is pretty accurate, close to what it will be in practice, and he's calling at the correct frequencies and assigning his own felting range as such. So I kind of put this part in. It's not really relative right now. It's not really relevant, but I just wrote that. Perhaps not here, but it's good to know that we are allowed to bet with less than 50% equity simply through the dead pot dynamic. And by manipulating his calling range to make this bet plus EV, the bigger we bet, the narrower his range becomes, which means the more hands he's forced to felt will dominate us, and our EV trends towards negative. And I did a very extreme example of that. That's pretty much the underlying theme of this video, that we can manipulate his calling range by our bet size to ensure a plus EV bet versus his range he's going to respond to that with. And by manipulating that, we can print money pretty much. So I just did a quick extreme example down here to prove that point. So let's say instead of betting hot pot here, I decided to, I guess that would be pretty much all in, but let's just say I did a very precise 2 times over bet. So I decided to put in $84 here. Let's analyze that. I think off the bat, you should be able to understand that it's a clear polarization error. Like, the bigger we start betting with this quality hand, the closer we become to making a polarization error. And it would be cool to figure out where the threshold is to break even, but I didn't do that. So, taking the same approach above, we are betting 2x pot and running the little math here. This is algebra here. We would need him to fold almost 67% of the time for a bet with any 2 cards to be plus EV. So the optimal opponent defends 33.3% of the time. So again, he's getting to the river with the same range here, which is 50.5 combos. And now he's forced to only defend 33% of that, which I just rounded up to 17 combos here. Whereas before, when we gave him 3-1, we bet hot pot, he was forced to defend 33 combos. So pretty much we raised our bet sizing by 4x, and his mandatory felting range has only divided by 2. So that's an interesting thing to note. Just how that works dynamically. So again, we take the same approach and we allot 17 combos that he's calling with. And he's going to have that 10 flush, which dominates us. 4 combos we split against. Basically, we're constricting his range to only include his strongest possible hands here. So that's why it's split by 2. He's going to be calling with hands that are going to dominate us at the highest frequency possible. And that is very devastating for us. And as such, it kind of defeats the purpose of manipulating the calling range based on the bet size, because it's working against us here, as we'll see. So again, 10 combos dominance, 4 combos we split against, which would be ace king. There are 2 combos of king queen suited and 1 combo of king queen offsuit we beat, and those would be his next strongest hands. So 59% of the time we expect to lose an $84 bet here. 18% of the time we expect to win the dead pot and the call, which will be $126. And 23% of the time against the ace king we wash. And then run some quick calculations, just as we did before. And we'll see that we should net negative 27 big blinds on average here. And I guess to wrap things up, it's kind of cool to note that here we're giving him 3-2 when we double overbet. I think that's right. Yeah. And we're making negative 27 big blinds. And up here we gave him 3-1, and we're making around the same, but in the positive. So that's kind of cool to look at. I don't know if that's a general trend or anything, but yeah. So hopefully that was a good video that kind of exemplifies how you can manipulate calling ranges by bet size and how you can make that advantageous for your exact holding. And yeah, hopefully you learned a thing or two, and I found it pretty rewarding going over it once more for the sake of my own learning experience. So yeah, thank you for watching. Appreciate it.